Hello, welcome to another edition of our Viper nanoCHATs. This is an opportunity for the Ionic community to engage in some thoughtful discussions of teaching, do some reflective teaching practices, and to share these with the wider community. We welcome people to comment on these nanoCHATs and offer their perspectives on some of these timely topics. So first, I will introduce myself. My name is Hillary Epley. I teach at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, and I would like to introduce our panelists today.
Yes.
Or let them introduce themselves.
Okay. I'm Dean Johnston, and I teach at Otterbein University in Westerville, Ohio.
Hello, I'm Tendai Gadzikwa. I teach at Kansas State University.
And I'm Kari Young, and I teach at Center College in Danville, Kentucky.
Thank you all for being here today. Our topic for the day is one that I know I, as an instructor, am always thinking about, and is what is a method that you use to give students feedback that's sustainable for you as a faculty member. And I know this is something that, you know, too many hours spent grading, too many hours writing comments that I think they don't look at, and trying to find out better ways to do this and better ways to get our feedback across to students. So our panelists today are going to each share something that they do in their classrooms, and then we're going to have a little discussion based on it.
Yes, so I'll go ahead and start. And so this specifically refers to something that I did in the fall of 2020, where I was teaching a relatively large, for Otterbein, section of general chemistry, completely online. So I had set up a format where there was asynchronous videos for them to watch, and then we would have synchronous meetings where we would discuss and work through problems. And what I would do is, for each of the videos that I assigned them, I would ask them to reflect either in a Muddiest Point format or a 3-2-1, where they're giving some takeaways and some questions and maybe something that they liked about a video. And then they would submit this through our learning system, and I would respond. And I really enjoyed reading all of these questions and responding. And initially I was responding, you know, every class period to every student on every video, and that wasn't sustainable. And and what I also found out is, even though I really enjoyed it, sort of the one-on-one, even though we were remote and online, it wasn't spreading some of that information to the larger class. So what I ended up doing was taking all those questions and putting them into a document that I could then sort of sort through the questions, find the common questions and put those together, and then find a few of the ideas or sort of different, unique, fun things that we could also spend a little time talking about, and then provide that document as a single thing that everybody in the class could see. And then we could spend a little time in the synchronous session discussing that. So I found that more sustainable, and also I think more beneficial to the class as a whole.
That's really interesting. One thing I really like about that is that students then get to see what questions the other students asked when they weren't on the spot. You know, you didn't
exactly
in class. And so I think there's something really equitable about that, and also really reassuring for students that, oh yeah, somebody else had my question. I think that's really neat.
Could you just explain what 3-2-1 is? I'm familiar with Muddiest Point, but I had not heard 3-2-1 before.
Yeah, it takes a lot of different forms. I actually read about it on the, I forget whether it was on the Discord or the Ionic Viper website, but I know I read about it there somewhere. So yeah, it can take different forms, but I think the way I did it was just a different way of structuring the feedback. So it was 3 takeaways. So getting them to sort of reflect on the material itself, 2 questions, which is a little bit like, right, what do they have questions about? And then one thing that they really enjoyed.
Oh,
which I like because that sort of like tries to get them engaged at a level more than just, you know, I have to do this. And that's where I found some of the most interesting feedback for those students.
interesting.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right. Our next presenter, Tendai.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess my feedback is of a different kind. So I generally teach smaller classes. So senior, inorganic, and maybe a few grad students. So they're quite small classes. So my feedback is not necessarily about kind of necessarily saving time for lots of assignments or things like that. It's more on a general thing. So the idea is, for a lot of the students who are taking the class, it will be their first time seeing symmetry and group theory. And, you know, I think a lot of students struggle and they may kind of tend to panic a little bit. So I've kind of come up with a way of, they say, giving feedback, you know, maybe a third into the class, just more along the lines of, you know, this is something that's difficult. It's going to take time. A lot of it involves input from me and me teaching you, but then a lot of it actually involves them having to go over things, practice a lot. And the idea is to give the feedback in a way that doesn't make it seem like I'm accusing them of not trying very hard, but it's more just saying, you know, you're already doing this, but I think maybe you need to do more of this. So the system that I have is that we have this little survey that just asks some, you know, questions along the lines of, had you seen symmetry before? You know, how comfortable do you feel with these concepts? How often do you engage with the lecture notes? You know, the online resources that I've given you, or the textbook, or even how often when you have problems or questions or things you don't understand, how often do you ask me to clarify? And so that they start to think about those things, and then they can assess on their own how much of that they've done. And then at the end, of course, I also ask things like, oh, what do you think you could do more of? What do you think I could do more of? And then so that I always have that as a reference. So I always have that as a reference when I talk to them later. So I might be like, well, you know, previously you said that you haven't really been looking at these online resources, you know, that, you know, Otterbein, you know, the symmetry website is actually really good, especially if you have difficulty looking at things in 3 dimensions. So it's a way to give feedback without making it seem like I'm accusing them of something or thinking that they're not doing enough. It's more like, I know you've already been doing the work, but these are the places that you said you could improve, and I can show you where to go to do that better or how to do that better.
Yeah, I like that. It actually reminds me of one of the other nanoCHATs. I think Joanne Stewart was talking about what she does is she asks the students sort of what they already know and helps them understand that they're not coming to this completely with nothing, right? They already know something about, you know, symmetry, or they already know something about chemistry, whether it's in Gen Chem or inorganic. So I like that sort of affirms that they do bring something to it.
Yeah.
Also need opportunity to see change over time, right? Where you say, you said
Yeah.
something like, how comfortable were you with symmetry at the beginning? And then in a later conversation, you can point out like, oh, look how well you're doing at this. And so to get an opportunity to applaud students, and also that way for them to recognize how they've changed.
Yeah.
What a great conversation to have with students.
Oh, yeah, it usually is.
Awesome. Kari, would you like to share yours?
Sure, yeah. So when I think about giving feedback, for me, that's so tied to grading so often. And in particular, I think about the time that I spend trying to give feedback on students' writing. Informal writing assignments in my general chemistry classes, and then of course lab-related writing in both general chemistry and my senior level inorganic chemistry course. And so the way that I have worked out to give constructive but also sustainable feedback on those assignments is through rubrics. So in my, especially for my general chemistry writing, where it's kind of a informal reflective sort of thing, I've developed a rubric that kind of builds up toward a particular grade, but has sort of specific descriptions of the things that I'm looking for in those assignments. So for example, to get a letter grade of C, these are the things that have to happen. Your writing has to have a thesis statement, that kind of thing. To get a B, you have to do all the C things and add a certain level. And then to get an A, it has to do all of the things in the B category and go above and beyond that in a specific way that's appropriate to the assignment. And so that list of characteristics ends up being a mechanism for feedback where I can kind of select like, oh yes, you did these things, but here's where I felt like your work could have expanded a little bit. This is the part that was missing for me. And so then it is part of grading, but the grading becomes a constructive feedback mechanism. One other way that I've tried to make that sustainable is to integrate it with my, integrate it electronically, especially with my LMS. We use Moodle and have the Turnitin plugins with that. And Turnitin, lots of these different systems have grading tools. The one that I'm the most familiar with is Turnitin. And Turnitin will let you import a rubric so that the student can look at an electronic submission and their rubric side by side. And you can have those rubric categories there and add additional comments. Turnitin, other LMS systems will also let you save inline feedback as like little sticky note thought bubbles that you can add to student writing. So when you're grading lab reports and your student doesn't format something correctly, or capitalizes the name of an element, or they're they use the word machine when they should use instrument, you can have a sticky note for that. And so that makes it go a little bit quicker instead of having to type or write that comment for each student. I will say that it takes time to sort of transition grading from paper to an electronic format, and it takes time to develop a good rubric. I've gone through a lot of iterations on a lot of my rubrics where they didn't say something that they needed to say, or they said some things that weren't really useful feedback categories. And so I encourage the rest of all of us, as we're thinking about giving feedback to students, to recognize that it takes time to get into a good place. And I really think about that when Dean was describing his approach to the problem, that he was trying to give students good feedback, and then he needed to iterate and find out a way that was more sustainable to give that to all students. And the same with Tendai. I'm sure that she has developed her survey questions over time so that she's asking the right questions and getting the right kind of feedback. So I think that all of these approaches together are neat ways of starting that conversation with students, and recognizing also that there are similarities between students, that the same thing happens over and over again.
I have a question. I was wondering, do you, so we don't use the same software. I mean, I think we use Canvas, but can you tell how much the students will actually, how much of those sticky notes and your rubric, and how much, if they actually interact with that at all? Is that something that you can see?
So it's probably something I could see. I don't look for that a lot, but right. It is part of the, in the same kinds of the conversations you were talking about having with students, when they say, okay, well, how, like, I'm not happy with my grades on my lab reports, then I can say, well, okay, did you look at my feedback? Right. And that's there. In some, more recently, I've also been working on a more specifications or mastery grading scheme. And so in that case, you have, these are the standards that your lab report has to meet. And if it didn't meet standards, you get another try. But that's very motivating for students to go and look at that and figure out what they need to polish.
That seems like really good teaching, but really unsustainable potentially.
Well, yeah, you have to, yes, that's also part of that iteration, right? Is how much more trying do you give? What are the terms for that? When does that have to happen? And in my case, my experiments on that are in my smallest classes, where I can devote time to that. Great point, Hillary.
All right. Other comments for Kari? Question? I think we're good. Any other sort of general comments from anyone?
I think this is all very, very good. I appreciate this. Thank you.
I really appreciate all of you participating today. Thank you to our audience for joining us for this nanoCHAT, and feel free to come on to the Discord or onto the YouTube channel and add your own comments and questions for our presenters today, and tune in soon for another episode of nanoCHATs in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.